Okay, so today we're going to be looking at essay writing in history. First, we'll be looking at discursive essays. So these are essays where you're basically using only your own knowledge to tell the story, to answer the topic, to write the essay. So, when you're given an essay in a exam or a test or an assignment, you're going to obviously be posed the question. So you're presented with a question or a topic that you need to discuss. Okay. And then once you've seen the topic from your own knowledge, immediately, the cogs are going to start spinning in your head, and you're going to immediately start thinking of which way you're going to go with this essay, what you need to say, what you're going to start talking about. So it's already going to get you to start thinking and triggering some ideas of how to begin your essay based off the knowledge that you already have of the topic. Cool. So let's just look at this topic. Explain to what extent Stalin succeeded in transforming Russia into a superpower by 1939. So already, with my knowledge that I've already had over the course of doing this topic and the content, I can begin to start thinking about, right, I need to discuss this, I need to talk about the 5-year plans, and that's basically what this is asking you to discuss and focus on, is the 5-year plan. Then you will go into planning your essay. Okay, so this is very, very important, and I cannot stress enough how important it is. Please don't ever go straight into just writing an essay slapdash, like off the cuff. Otherwise, you're not going to be concise. You're not going to have your ideas in one paragraph. It's going to be all over the place. You're going to lose a lot of marks. It's just really, really silly. Just don't do it. Right, so let's get into the planning. Okay, so there are different methods you can use to plan an essay, and you can do what you find is very helpful to you. I know the top 2 sort of methods of planning an essay in history are using tables and mind maps. I use mind maps personally because I find that it kind of just links it. So what I'll do is I'll put the topic sort of idea in the middle and span, draw branches off it from there. Those branches are the main sort of subtopics and ideas. And then under there, I put the content, the knowledge, etc., etc. So for example, with this, if I was doing it in a mind map, I would put, the first 5-year plan, and then kind of branch off and say industrial agriculture, write my points, and then kind of move on from there. So that's a good way to kind of start looking at your essay, what you need to do, where you need to go with it. So while you're doing this, while you're planning, you need to think of the main points and ideas that fall into the topic that answer the question, okay, and what you will be discussing within your essay. And then each idea or your main point will be discussed in each paragraph, okay. So think of it this way: one paragraph is one idea or one subtopic or one point, okay? So you must constantly link each paragraph back to the topic as well. So, for example, let's say your topic is speaking about collectivization. You need to link collectivization back to the topic of how collectivization made Russia into the superpower that it became. Right. Okay, so let's move on. Once you have all your information down and you've grouped it into respective subtopics, so because oftentimes while you are planning your essay, you'll find, oh, okay, I've just thought of that. Even though I'm busy dealing with industrialization, hey, I've just thought about how, small farmers were allowed to own private land, which they could then sell to the state, okay, and make a little bit of money for themselves. Okay, but that leads to collectivization. So let me go pop that back there in collectivization. So once you've grouped all your information into their respective subtopics, you can then look at doing your introduction and conclusion, because now you have an idea of what you will be discussing in your essay, which is really important. You can't really do an introduction or a conclusion until you know what you're talking about, because that introduction is going to introduce what you're speaking about, and your conclusion is going to end off what you have spoken about. Okay. So let's get into the introduction. What do you need to do for an introduction? Well, you must first and foremost answer the question, and it must show the stance that you're taking in your essay. So you answer the question, you take a stance. So to what extent? Well, a great extent, or it was very successful. Here's why. Okay, so from there, you're already telling your reader or your marker, this is what I'm saying, this is the stance I'm taking, and here's why. Okay, so that's very, very important to do. If you do not do that, your introduction is null and void. Basically, your argument is null and void, and it's very difficult for you to get more than about 30% for an essay. So an introduction is so important in an essay. You've really got to hit it and get it down. Okay. So you then obviously, once you've stated your stance, you must state what you will be discussing in the essay, as I've said. So the ideas, the points you'll be making. And then obviously your introduction can only be between 5 to 10 lines of writing. So it needs to be quite concise. Please do not say, in this essay, I will be discussing. Because first and foremost, we know we never say I, me, we in an essay. We never use personal pronouns in history, as it leads to it being subjective and therefore bias. Again, rendering your argument null and void. It always has to be objective. So also never say in this essay, such and such will be discussed. It's not a great introduction. It doesn't grab a reader's attention. It doesn't grab your marker's attention. Already your marker's kind of like, this is going to be about a 50% worth essay. So try steer away from that. It's kind of what kids in grade 8 and junior school do. Okay. And also, when you get into varsity, if you go to varsity, they never ever want to see that. So we're kind of preparing you for that. And they don't ever want to see that in a matric final either. Right, so now you've done that, you're then going to go into your first paragraph. Okay, so now we've done our introduction. You can kind of start now. Some people like to begin writing out their paragraphs. You can do that, but it can take a bit of time. So if you're a slow writer or you tend to feel very pressured under time, then maybe don't do that. Maybe actually just go straight into your body. So I sometimes don't actually write my conclusion or plan my conclusion until I have written the whole body of the essay. Okay. And written the introduction actually out in, formal, properly in the essay, because oftentimes I feel like you can't really write your conclusion until you've woven the threads that you will do throughout the body. Okay, so let's get into the body. So you're going to start off with your paragraph, and each paragraph will contain similar ideas, like I've said. Your paragraph has to link back to the topic. So each paragraph is going to be discussing something. So let's say this paragraph is discussing collectivization, and then we link back collectivization to the topic, whether it's successful, whether it was not successful. Yes, collectivization led Russia to becoming a superpower. Okay. So you're going to be doing that constantly. Why? Because this shows focus. You need to show focus. You need to show that you are linking your knowledge that you have of the content to the topic. It's what you need to do. And then you're on your way to about a solid 80-90% for an essay. Okay. Then, if need be, because let's say, some of these topics can be quite a large chunk. Let's say you need to break them down because you don't want paragraphs that are really big. They're difficult to read. They already put a marker into a bad mood. So you've got a paragraph there, and let's keep it between around about 10 lines. That's a nice size for a paragraph, 8 to 10 lines. So if you need to break up the information, that's fine. Do that. So you can discuss collectivization in 3 paragraphs if needs be. But if you break it up, you must link whatever you're discussing in each of those paragraphs back to the topic. Okay. As you'll see there. Remember, you constantly need to be linking this argument to the topic. Fantastic. Great. So now, you have discussed your whole essay, you've written it, you've done all your paragraphs, everything. Now we need to move on to the conclusion. And now, a conclusion is so important in an essay because it basically ties your whole argument together, and ends your argument. So your body of your essay builds up to your conclusion. It needs to pack a punch. It needs to leave the marker or the reader feeling like you know your content and that you have concluded your argument well. So it needs to have that satisfactory ending. Like, yes, that is solid. I get your argument. I know what you're saying. Yes, I agree with you. Okay, so this is where you bring it home. It must tie up everything you have discussed in your paragraph, so in the body of your essay. And again, it shows how what you have discussed links to the topic. So again, you're linking back to the topic. Right. So how I like to explain it is that each paragraph is a thread, okay? And you are weaving these threads throughout your essay, throughout the body. And as it comes to the end, your conclusion basically takes all those threads that you have woven throughout the bodies of your essay and ties them into a beautiful bow on top of like a present, okay? So that's like you're putting the final bow on top of the present. It's like the final drive home point, right? But you must remember, you never introduce new information in the conclusion, ever. Otherwise, it's not a conclusion. And if you do not have a conclusion, you're looking, again, like I said, if you don't have an introduction or you don't have a conclusion or if you don't have both, you're looking at about 30% for an essay because technically you haven't formatted your essay correctly. Okay. So now let's get into source-based essays. So source-based essays, you take the same format as you would do for a discursive essay, but now you're adding statements or information from sources that will be provided to you in an exam, a test, assignment, whatever it may be. So now your planning method again is the same. So whatever works for you, do it. Okay, you're going to be doing the same thing of making sure all your sort of similar points are under the same subtopic, which will be designated to one paragraph. But now you'll just add quotes from your sources that support your argument or point you are making in the essay. Please note, I say quotes. All right, so how do we do this? Well, let's get into quoting from sources. When you take a quote from a source, try not to take big chunks or long sentences, because this tells the marker that you actually are quite uncertain of what you're wanting to say. You're not able to put things into your own words, where we know that's not the point. The point of using quotations and statements from sources is just to basically back up what you are saying and just add like the spiciness and the flavor to it, right? So we're going to use a quote. So let's say we read through a source and we say, okay, great. We identify that we want to use this little snippet of a sentence for our paragraph because it actually supports how industrialization increased. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to take that little section and you put it into quotation marks. And that's what your quotation marks look like. Then, immediately after your sentence and your quotation, so immediately after that last quotation mark, you will then state where you got the information from in brackets. So in brackets, you'll put source B, source A, whatever the source is called. So, for example, also in some exams, they will say, it'll say source B, let's say it's an image, a picture of Stalin. And it says, this is taken from, I'm just going to use this as an example, Wikipedia, and it gives you the URL, access 23rd of April, 2019. Okay, you're not going to write all of that out. You're just going to say source B. Perfect. Please note, in an exam, you cannot say, or in any essay, source-based essay, you cannot say, source B states that Stalin's first 5-year plans was a success because it increased industrial production. Okay, so you cannot say it like that. This is how you would have to structure the sentence. You would rather say, now I'm taking the quote from, the source. Stalin's first 5-year plan was a success, please note, source B, because it increased industrial production, full stop. Right, so there's an example of how you would quote from sources. That is the correct format you must use, and it's pretty simple. So you're just going to slot this in to the same idea and the same sort of format that you would for a discursive essay. You're now just adding in evidence to support your argument. Great. So let's get into the last type of essay you will kind of do in history, and it's called a counter argument. Right. So some essays will expect you to do a counter argument. You do this quite a bit in matric, and I'm going to start introducing it to you this year. These questions will often be posed as, to what extent were the 5-year plans successful? In this case, you'll present your argument for one side of the argument and vice versa. So you'll say, to a greater or lesser extent, the 5-year plans were successful. Okay, bear with me. So you would discuss why it was successful and then why it wasn't as successful, or vice versa. Okay, so how do you know which way to start, which way to go? Basically, you'll get given evidence and you'll be given sources. So you'll read through your sources, you look at your question, okay, and the question says to what extent? And you think to yourself, okay, well, let's go through them. Source A shows that it was successful. Source B shows it was unsuccessful. Source C shows it was unsuccessful. Source D shows it was successful. Source E shows it was successful. Source F shows it was successful. So already just counting that, we've got 4 sources showing it was successful and only 2 sources showing it was unsuccessful. Already we can see that this argument is kind of going to take a stance that it is to a greater extent that it was successful, because we've got more sources showing success and less sources showing unsuccess. Okay. So that's how you know which way to lean. Okay. But you're still going to argue both sides. All right. So you can also see, like I've said, how many sources show the successes and how many show the failures. This gives you a good idea about which side you will lean more towards. And then when it comes to the conclusion in the essay of this, you're going to then tie up your argument, remember, with those like threads that you weave throughout your body of your essay and tie it into a beautiful bow to say, yes, to a greater or lesser extent, it was a success. So, in that case, where I gave you the example that you have 4 sources that show it was a success, you're going to say it was a greater success. So, to the extent it was greater than unsuccessful. Okay? And that's basically it. It's quite difficult to get used to, and it takes a lot of practice. Go over this a few times, and I'm sure this is going to help.